So we're more than halfway through our day. You've done a lot of heavy lifting. In agreeing to do so, you have possibly, probably increased your concentration, possibly, probably developed at least this much more mindfulness of what's around you, what's inside you, what's connected, what's not connected. And I said during some of the guidance, by virtue of your doing that, you're just placing yourself in the field of the Bramaviharas. Even if you're not filled with the feelings at this moment, I can share with you that when I lived at a Zen monastery for a year, and when I was living there, the regular schedule was, there was like 4 hours of meditation, and then there was work practice, work, and eating and sleeping. And during retreat, it'd just be hours and hours of sitting. And my experience of those hours and hours of sitting was that I felt like I rarely had the big sort of experiences or revelations within the retreat. Within the retreat, a lot of times what I'd be noticing is, my leg hurts, or why am I doing this, or who told me this was a good idea, or I could be at a Clippers game, any number of things. My sort of experiences, my major experiences, tended to come after retreat. That the practice locked in some kind of new way of being and seeing, and then I'd be out in the world and I'd have a new experience. So if you're struggling, or if you're getting that feeling, I'm not doing it right, it's one of the most popular thoughts during a retreat of any length, is that person, you look up. There was this one monk at the monastery who did everything perfectly. He made me completely nuts. Because back then I was a fidgeter, and I also thought that, I was the only one experiencing pain. I thought everybody else looked so, I thought, they're just sitting there, blissful. And, in fact, everyone was experiencing lots of different things, and, pain is a pretty universal experience. So, in the context of the Bramaviharas, I wanted to just talk a little bit about their, if not their opposites, just sort of what they're there to address. Another of Buddha's short lists was the 3 poisons. And the 3 poisons are what we are meditating to destroy, as it says on the hoodie. And they are greed, anger, and delusion. What I like about a lot of Buddhist formulations is that they really strip things down to, when you think about it, some very simple, true statements. For instance, during the guided meditation, the second foundation of mindfulness. I've talked before in this retreat about the first foundation of mindfulness. There's 4. First foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of body. Second foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of feeling, but it's mindfulness of feeling tone. So it's not mindfulness of am I mad, sad, glad. It's mindfulness of every thought that I have, every sensation that I have, any sort of experience, conscious experience that I have, can be thought of as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Right? I don't know what the other categories might be. There's a continuum, but still, in the end, like right now, I'm sitting here, slight unpleasantness in my ankle. Spontaneous thought of my kid came up, very pleasant. Being here, pleasant. Sound of the coffee maker, very pleasant. Love that sound, right? So that's a meditation. That is in this when one is working with the second foundation, as opposed to the breath and the touch points, and there's lots of other body-oriented meditations. If one is working on the second foundation, they're just pleasant, unpleasant. Just sit there, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. For some people, it's a very hard practice. For me, that's a very hard practice. To just sit there with that over and over again. But what it's doing is, it's simplifying and making clear sort of what it is we're dealing with here. Like very, very strong terms: greed, anger, and delusion. Right? But then think of the less severe versions of those words. Right? Greed. I greedily want to get up and pour myself a cup of coffee. Mm-hmm. But that's not what time is. Right? And to use another strong word, right? The word that sort of starts the Four Noble Truths, suffering. Suffering. Right now, I might be suffering because I cannot get my hands on that coffee. Right? Anger. I am mad at my ankle. I can be mad at my ankle for feeling this pain. Fuck you, ankle. Stop doing that. And then the delusion is, it's a little more complex, but it's that another sort of word for it is confusion, or not seeing things correctly. And the ability to see things correctly comes from this concentration, mindfulness, from this mindfulness practice. There's many, 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 one more time, many ways that I am deluded. Not in the way that one might be deluded if they're in a delusional state. One does not have to be in a paranoid delusional state to be delusional, right? So, greed, anger, and delusion. Think of how loving kindness applies, right? If I'm coming to things with a spirit of loving kindness, that is certainly going to neutralize greed, anger, and delusion. Because one of the delusions that I have is that loving kindness isn't real or important, or I don't deserve it, or you don't deserve it, or, whatever it is that's going on with me. Resentment towards self, resentment towards others. And compassion. Compassion is, loving kindness and compassion both are very, very generous in spirit. It's generosity. So if I'm in a state of generosity, compassion is like this deep, empathic, emotional generosity. So if that's happening, that's right there. That's just spontaneously destroying greed. Destroying anger. It's so hard for me to be angry when compassion is present. Because the compassion is, if you boil it down to what it's really about, the compassion is for the suffering of that person or situation that's making me angry, or could potentially make me angry. And then appreciative joy I love where that sits with the greed aspect, right? If you have joy, I have less joy? Question mark. I want that joy. Give me my joy. You took my joy, right? I mean, it's insane. It doesn't feel insane when you're in it. It feels like this is what I should be doing in order to protect my joy, right? But if I'm in a state of appreciative joy, if I can really, really, really be happy about the happiness of others, there's nothing to be greedy about. There's nothing to be angry about, right? What, I'm going to be angry that you got something? Which again that's a manifestation. And again, all of this, by the way, is so human. I mean, this is everything that we're talking about here is the result of Buddha's deep, I guess, and his teachers before him and the teachers after, right? His deep exploration into the nature of the human experience. And it manifested in his initial huge opening up of his compassion for all beings when he saw what suffering really was. And then through his, I think, 7 years or so of seeking out all the greatest spiritual teachers of that time and sitting with all of them and getting all of it, and with each one of them getting to a point like, wow, I now know so much, but I don't think you've given me the final answer. And so he kept going, and then by the time he got to the place where he was going to sit and not get up until he felt he had the answer, at that point, pretty much everybody thought he was the man, and he was, of all the ascetics, of all the practitioners doing this spiritual journey that is marked by extreme self. I was going to say deprivation. Let's call it that, like renunciation on steroids, right? Where it's like I'm standing by a riverbank. My nails are grown out, my hair's grown out. I eat 1 grain of rice a day. You can see my rib cage. And through this, completely to the extreme, saying no to worldly concerns, that is spirituality. That, again, that was, at the time, that was the best thinking. And there are still people who think that way, right? What happened with him, though, was he said, I don't know. The way the story is told is that he's standing by the riverbank on one leg, eating his grain of rice for the day, and a boat goes by, and there's someone with a guitar-like instrument of the time, and he's tuning it. I think I shared last time, I said, like at a Grateful Dead show, right? Lots of tuning. And he's tuning a guitar, and he's explaining to someone else on the boat. He says, if it's too loose, it doesn't play. But if it's too tight, it breaks. And Buddha had one of those mind-blown experiences, and he realized as he ate his little grain of rice, this is not the answer. The answer was not in being so loose that, it's like sex and drugs and rock and roll. And the answer is not in, and nothing else. And it's not in, grain of rice by the riverbank with my long beard. It's something that is going to be the middle path. Mm. That's where the answer lies. And so he said goodbye to his friends by the riverbank, who are all kind of looking at him as like the guy. And they're all like, yeah, loser, you're breaking the code. This is it. You're not the guy anymore. And Buddha's like, I'll see you guys later. And he went. They eventually became disciples again. But he went and he said, I'm going to sit under this tree until I figured it out. And it took him, basically 7 days and 8 nights or something like that. He sat for 7 days. On the 8th morning, he saw the morning star and realized all manifest things are Buddha. And when he had that realization, he wasn't thinking in Pali or Sanskrit or whatever he would be thinking in, those words. He just had the experience. And in having that experience, he was at first led to thinking to himself, as many of you, if you've ever had that kind of experience, right, that deep spiritual experience, and you've tried to explain it to somebody else, it's very hard. And he was just like, there's no way, because he had the big one, right? And so he was like, there's no way that anybody's going to understand this. I have no idea how to teach it. And so he told someone along the way, I cannot teach this. I won't. No one will understand it. It's pointless. Wow, imagine if he actually followed through on that, right? He went to the grave with the info. Yeah. And he said, the person he was talking to said, well, Buddha said, people have too much dust in their eyes. And he said, well, what about people who have just a little less dust? He didn't even say people with no dust. He said, what about a person who has a little less dust in their eyes? And Buddha said, all right. And he tried to teach him, he couldn't really figure out how to do it. I think he tried a couple of times and it just like fell flat. It's like a comedian who, like crickets. Everyone looked at him like the RCA Victor dog, like Scooby-Doo. And finally he came up with the Four Noble Truths. And so, there's a long way of saying, or a Buddhist explanation way of saying, that that middle path, he realized, was for one to start from the place of realizing what the problem of this experience of being born into a body is. Mm. And the problem is that life can't, like the translation that people often use is life is suffering, which is usually why many people come to a Buddhist temple or whatever and practice for exactly one day. They hear, life is suffering? Well, that's a bummer. I'm going to go somewhere else where they're preaching something else. But much like the 12 steps later on, starting with powerlessness, they start with. There's power discovered. So it's the same, or similar in this whole conception, which is it starts with life is suffering. Is there anyone here that's going to disagree? Right? So when he says life is suffering, he doesn't mean life is suffering and completely bereft of joy. What he means is, think of this. I had a Buddhist teacher who once said to me, or said to the group, he said, of every 1,000 things that you do, big and small, 3 will go your way. Right? Like, even like the smallest thing. Like earlier, I was ringing the bell, and I was going to hit the second ring, and I missed the bell. Count that up. One thing didn't go my way. There was one of the times I was ringing the bell, and the third one, I was like, I wanted that to be louder. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're looking at we're not going to get all stoner talk about it, but we're like, it's about these sort of, it's about micro moments and micro sort of situations. Like any of the smallest things, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Any of the smallest things, greed, anger, delusion, possible. Right? Any of the smallest things. So there's the big suffering, right? I'm born into a body. I discover one of the things I discovered through this practice, you can discover it other ways. I mean, you don't have to do this practice to know that things are impermanent, right? And at first that can be like, oh, fuck, that's fucked up. That sucks. And through this practice, you discover something different about that. But anyway, that the impermanence is there, and that there's the suffering of, losing things and not getting what you want and all that. And then there's the suffering of, there's a teacher at Against the Stream, Dave Smith, and he cracked me up once. We were sitting with somebody, and he was trying to explain suffering to them. The suffering of being born into a body. And he goes, and the Pali word is dukkha, right? Dukkha. He goes, yeah, dukkha. I'm born into a body. Now I gotta take a shower. I gotta go to work. I gotta get something to eat, right? So it's not necessarily like suffering. I need to get something to eat. I'm so hungry. We're just talking about like, I gotta get something to eat, right? And there's potential for suffering around that. There's a difficulty to that. That's another translation, is that it's like life is difficult, right? One Buddhist teacher described it as like a wheel that's just off its axle, and it's going the-thunk, the-thunk, the-thunk. So given that, then the second noble truth is that the cause of suffering. Oh, good, you've got a solution, or you've got the underpinnings of it. The cause of suffering is craving and clinging. So, when I sit with addicts, fellow addicts, it's so much fun to realize that, right? Sort of like, wow, the entire human race is craving and clinging. We're just better at it. We just take it to another level, right? But it's humanized to me. It's humanizing that experience. It's humanizing that experience, and not only that, it's telling me that all that happened was I got caught in an extreme sports version of the human experience. So then, well, what's the third noble? I hope there's good news coming out, right? Third noble truth is there can be an end to suffering. And how would that be? By ending craving and clinging. Not for nothing, but for the many people in 12-step in this room, there was this article in thefix.com. I might have mentioned it either last time or to a couple of you one-on-one, but there's an article in fix.com where it was called Bill W. and the Buddha, or vice versa. And the writer had discovered a pamphlet from the early Akron group, like from early 40s, and it was edited by Dr. Bob. And I always thought of Dr. Bob as the more kind of Christian-y of the two founders. And in this pamphlet, it says something to the effect of, we've looked at all the different spiritual traditions of the world, and the one that seems to most line up with our 12 steps is the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path of the Buddha. What? Right? And I've intuitively felt that since I landed at a Buddhist monastery like 4 months into being sober in 12 steps in AA. And the long and the short of it is, really, the end of suffering comes from the end of craving and clinging, and now I'm in recovery and I'm engaged in a practice that is designed to end craving and clinging. And then through ending that craving and clinging of the substance or the behavior or whatever, I then end up probably more likely to be more skilled at the rest of the third noble truth. if I put my mind to it. And then the fourth noble truth is, well, how do you do this? The Eightfold Path, which we've been sort of talking about a little bit here today, both in the talk earlier and the meditations. So the first factor of the Eightfold Path, this is what we're doing and what we're talking about. We're increasing our level of wisdom together. The wisdom of knowing what it's like to be a human being. The wisdom of knowing that other human beings are having the same experience. The wisdom of that experience, as far as Buddha was concerned, it's a delusion. It's an illusion. Like the way we think about things. When we think about things in this way of craving and clinging, what we're doing is we're having a fist fight with impermanence. Right? Every time I want to cling to something, it's like, I want to keep it. Or want to make it go away forever. When I crave and I cling, I am desperately trying to end my suffering through not skillful action. Bless. The terminology that Buddha used, wholesome and unwholesome, and skillful and unskillful. Although I think it was Jack Kornfield said that, or Pema Chodron. I mix them all up all the time. One of them said something to the effect that if you could translate it as unskillful and beautiful. Actions, words that I take, they can be unskillful or they're beautiful. So when you think of loving kindness and compassion and appreciative joy and equanimity, essentially what we're talking about is becoming harmless, meaning walking through the world without harming ourselves or others. And when we do that, we don't do it perfectly. I was just reminded of something I used to hear in there was this member of one of the early groups that I went to in AA who used to say, when you're on an airplane, I don't know if the technology is the same now, this is 1989, but when an airplane's flying, it's never flying completely straight. Never. It's always, at least this much. Right? It's never flying completely straight, and there's an instrument that, a little to the left, a little to the right, to keep it on course, a little to the left, a little to the right. And he used to say, and he had a voice like his voice was, he'd talk like this, and he said, and this instrument, it doesn't say a little to the left, asshole. A little to the right, dumbass. Right? It says to the left, to the right, to the left, to the right. And so, right there, loving kindness, compassion, right? Whether it be self-talk, whether it be outward talk, whether it be self-action, whether it be outward action. So this practice, equanimity, right? Equanimity is a little to the left, a little to the right, a little to the left. So when I'm in a less skillful state, I'm way to the left, way to the right, and hopefully I've got enough practice to keep me, like from spinning out completely. And as we practice further and get better at this, smaller variations. It's interesting. I was told that a couple of major spiritual people, like spiritual rock stars, when they got like a life-threatening diagnosis, they both completely fucking freaked out, right? Right? People expected them to be like, yes, I do have that diagnosis. But they both completely flipped out, at least for a short period of time. And then I guess they got a little, their instrument worked. And then last night, I was, like I said, at the very important Dharma event of seeing Patti Smith. And after the show, one of the friends, I was with friends who I've been friends with for over 25 years from New York. And one of them gave me, they had a scary diagnosis. And I've just been watching my response. I've lost a lot of people in the last couple of years. So I've been watching my instrument, for the last less than 24 hours. And, I'm someone who, both without recovery and then early in my recovery, I had a lot of that, like a little bit like I described early in the retreat, of like a false equanimity. I could stay chill, but it wasn't really chill. And I'm just noticing that, through the gentle allowing of any and all of the feelings, opinions, thoughts, sensations that I'm having since this person told me this, I'm in a reasonable state of equanimity. And it doesn't feel like a dial tone, right? It's just mindful awareness of the ongoing processing of this information and the ongoing noticing as I I go into nostalgic memory of our friendship, and then there'll be, what am I going to do when they're receiving treatment? How am I going to be there for them? They don't live here, and I notice and I come back, and I notice and I come back. And I know it sounds simple, and it might also sound, if you're not very well practiced at this, it can almost sound like a coldness. But I'm much more available in this state of equanimity for this person or anyone else than I am when I'm cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And this person's a practitioner too, so we're just kind of looking at each other and seeing it through those eyes. So, why do this practice? Well, the first advertisement is that I got 4 divine abodes for you, if you keep coming back, as it were. And, different people have different ideas about what Buddha meant by enlightenment, by nirvana, by, by rebirth, right? karma and reincarnation, all those things. These are all things for your own sort of discovery, what that means. There's the rebirth that is, if you believe in reincarnation, like I'm coming back as an aardvark next time because I fucked up this time. There's the reincarnation idea of the Mahayana tradition of, I might actually reach nirvana in this lifetime, but I'll choose not to take the nirvana card, and I'll come back as a bodhisattva because I want to save more beings. Or there's the idea that there's none of that, and that the being reborn over and over and over again, our birth, is the birth that we go through in each moment, the birth that we go through each time we hatch a new craving, the birth that we take on every time we hatch a new clinging. And so that this practice could end that, right? That I could be in a state where a moment at a time, moment to moment, I'm not craving, I'm not clinging, and I'm not suffering. Quick Zen story to close it. Samurai comes to the Zen master and says, I need you to explain to me heaven and hell, and I heard you're the one who understands it. Zen master says something to the effect of, I don't know. Samurai's like, I have traveled many miles on foot to find this out, and I heard you're the one who knows the answer. Zen master says, I got nothing. Samurai starts to get into his other part of his samurai mode, kind of reaching for his sword, getting puffed up, and just, really? Zen master, one more time. Samurai roars, pulls out his sword, pulls it over his head to kill the Zen master because he's so enraged. Zen master says, that's hell. Samurai drops the sword, falls to the ground in a full prostration in front of the Zen master, says, that's heaven. Greed, anger, and delusion. And loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, equanimity.